Good morning. It is Tuesday in the octave of Easter 2024. And you may have heard over the weekend, we've been on social media at all in the last few days, the bit of a dust up. um, I had a friend of mine, he and I were talking about this, that on Sunday, when our dear leader, the most highly visible Catholic in the country, who the media tells us till this week, actually, weirdly, that he is super devout, and they always like to show dear leader with a rosary in his hand, or kneeling at mass, or receiving the Eucharist at mass, or whatever. You've seen these pictures. That dear leader had decided to proclaim that 31st of March would be a day on the secular calendar, a feast day for the heresy of the mutability of the flesh, we'll call it. Just another on their long list of James Martin approved subjects. Would be a high feast day. It's not the first time he did this. He did this last year. He did it the year before. It's just that this year he made the announcement on Easter, because March 31st was Easter Sunday. This caused a firestorm, to the point where dear leader was asked yesterday if he had done that, and he said, I didn't make any such declaration. Then a picture of the declaration with his signature on it showed up all over social media. This may become a problem for him in a few months as he tries to get the public to give him a second chance. But dear leader really stepped in it. And so we're going to talk about this story today because something interesting happened. There was on Sunday, I think it was on Sunday, was the show Face the Nation, one of those Sunday morning talk shows that people still watch. They had Cardinal Wilton Gregory on, along with a priestess of some kind. I don't know who she is. I watched this again just to watch it, but before we do anything, just to get everything right. So there's the panel. Cardinal Wilton Gregory on the right, and that is a priestess or a bishopette or a deaconette from, I'm assuming, the Anglican so-called church. And yeah, they asked them about Joe. I don't know why they brought someone who isn't a Catholic on to speak about Catholic issues, but this clip here has gone viral, and we're going to talk about it briefly before going into some of the issues surrounding this. So the Face the Nation host asked Cardinal Gregory, do you get the sense that dear leader, his observance of his faith resonates with typical Catholics? I can answer that question and say, actually, yeah, it does. And I know that's unpopular, but to say here, but remember, we're in a bit of a bubble. When you consume a lot of traditional Catholic content online, you kind of live in a bubble. And does his display of faith? Sure. With anybody who is to the left of center in the Catholic Church. The church in the broader realm is just as divided as it is internally. And really, if his policies and his views align with Catholic, with Catholics whose views and policies align with his, it resonates. For everybody else, it doesn't. But that's not Cardinal Gregory's answer. He kind of dodges it. I can't play the clip for you. It's copyrighted. That's YouTube is very clear on that. So, but here is Cardinal Gregory's response. It's a lot better than I ever would have thought it would have been, but it's still not good. So his response is, I would say that he is very sincere about his faith. It's the part that's not good. But like many Catholics, he picks and chooses the dimensions of his faith to highlight while ignoring or contradicting other parts. There's a phrase that we have used in the past, a cafeteria Catholic. You choose that which is attractive and dismiss that which is challenging. You may have heard a lot of these trad recovery types, these anti-traditional Catholic types, have actually tried to hit us with the term cafeteria Catholic. They've tried to say the traditionalists are cafeteria Catholics because we don't just submit to every single thing Francis does, and we criticize him and all this other stuff. It's not the same thing. But they have tried that with us. So the fake priestess or deaconess sitting next to Cardinal Gregory interrupts him to say the following. Or, as St. Thomas Aquinas would say, you allow your conscience to guide you. So the host then says, is there something on the menu of cafeteria Catholicism that he's not ordering? To which Gregory says, there are things, especially in terms of the life issues, there are things he chooses to ignore or he uses the current situation as a political pawn rather than saying, look, my church believes this. That's the end of the clip. Now, I'm really surprised that he went there. He said it in the most nice way possible. So it came a little surprising that he did that. That he said it that way. That was surprisingly blunt, referring to it as his faith as a pawn. To basically. But Biden doesn't even acknowledge what the church teaches most of the time on these things, right? He just steps forward and says, no, I'm just going to do this. Now, the core issue here is with this. The issue here is with this is simple. Of course, why is a bishopette or a deaconette or whatever she is, probably from the Anglican Communion, why is she chiming in on Catholic issues? I honestly couldn't tell you why that is, but she invoked the primacy of conscience. So Thomas Aquinas famously does that. He tells you your conscience is, you have primacy of your personal conscience, and boy, has that been distorted since the 1960s, especially. You can't do that with Aquinas. You can't use him to defend what Dear Leader here is doing, because Dear Leader is rejecting Catholic teaching on these things. And the church teaches the truth, capital T, the capital T truth. So you can't use Aquinas for this, because all the issues that are very Catholic, Dear Leader ignores or overtly contradicts are the truth. He rejects the truth with his diabolical proclamation he issued on Sunday. God made people a certain way. There are only two options for that, and they're not up to our determination. Dear Leader contradicts the teachings of the faith. Your conscience is only primary and to be used in contention with the church when a church official rejects the truth. He has himself, Dear Leader, rejected the truth. His conscience can't allow that, because it's been malformed by decades of Catholic priests who won't stand up for the truth. Problem goes back to actually John F. Kennedy, and I'll show you a fairly good summary of this. It comes from an article at First Things. I don't even remember when they published this, because unlike a lot of articles here, this one doesn't actually have a date on it, it does. Wow, this is from like 14 years ago, March 3rd of 2010. But this is it's an article about how John Kennedy is responsible for this. Some of you may know the vague history of this, but President Kennedy, when he was just Senator Kennedy running for office, stood up and told the country that he would essentially not allow Rome to, the papacy, to dictate things he does as president. That's what he said, famously. And that if it became a big conflict between what a pope wanted him to do and what he needed to do as president, he would resign. That's what he said he would do. Now, he's, of course, was distorting the truth of things, but that's not surprising. So here, this article is about how a time when Archbishop Chaput gave an address on the mistakes Kennedy made and how they've been institutionalized among our Catholic public servants since that time, especially those of a certain political bent. So here, this part here from the article is worth your time. Quote, speaking to a group of Texas Protestants, just as Kennedy did in 1960, Archbishop Chaput identified Kennedy's errors as political, historical, and religious. Broadly, JFK's political and historical error was to misidentify the American understanding of public life as, quote, one where the separation of church and state is absolute, rather than a mere prohibition on state-run religious denominations. While foregoing discussion of how much church and state can be mutually nourishing when not tied together, Kennedy's speech equated religious membership with the corporate imposition of ecclesial law on civil life. As the then senator put it, quote, I believe in a president whose religious views are his own private affair, neither imposed by him upon the state or by the nation, or imposed by the nation upon him as a condition for holding that office. But as Archbishop Chaput noted, relegating religious acts to the private domain contradicts principal tenets of Christian religious ideals, and Christians, quote, have a mandate to share the gospel of truth, mercy, justice, and love. Real Christian faith is always personal. It's never private. Privatizing religion is, as it were, the imposition of a particular religious doctrine on religion, namely, the doctrine that religion is essentially a private pursuit. Kennedy's religious mistake, Chaput went on, was to tone down his Catholicism by advancing secularism. Or, as Jesuit scholar Mark Massa has said, Kennedy, quote, secularized the American presidency in order to win it. Kennedy's praise of religious freedom elsewhere in his speech was, of course, nothing but a canard, as the free exercise of religion was not an issue, either for him or for the Protestant ministers to whom he spoke. Kennedy was, it seems, the only voice advocating for a curb on the exercise of religion by deeming it a private matter. And it seems he was just as unwilling to impose his religious values on himself as he was to impose them on the public. And I'm going to pause here. There's a reason Kennedy did that. Lest we forget, and this article doesn't seem to touch on it really, in 1960, if you were a Catholic, the Protestant majority in the country didn't much care for us. Kennedy needed to win a number of a rather large portion of their support to even have a chance to win. And so he pinched incense to Caesar to do it, because that's exactly what he was doing here. The religious culture of the United States at this time was, yes, very Christian, but it was mostly Protestant. Yes, there were a fair number of Catholics at the time. That Catholics were growing in such influence at the time that a lot of Protestant ministers were trying to figure out how to curb Catholic influence, especially in light of a Catholic presidential candidate. So what did they do? One of the things they did was, a number of scholars have noted this, at the time, Catholics lived mostly in cities and in neighborhoods by ethnicity. You'd get Italian Catholics in Italian neighborhoods, Polish Catholics in Polish neighborhoods, Irish neighborhoods. You know the old stereotype. Well, that was how it was. And that was beginning to change because a lot of Protestant ministers were using their wealth and their influence to bring in new populations to those areas, to break up Catholic centers of power and to push those Catholics to the suburbs where they would have to live next to Protestants and not live in their enclaves anymore. It was one way of breaking up Catholic power at the time. And the reason they did that was because they were very, very afraid of the fact that every group in the country was suddenly not having as many kids as they used to, except for one, and that was Catholics. That would change with Catholics too, of course, because of things like what John Kennedy here did. Catholics would eventually, of course, especially after Vatican II, embrace the culture fully. And that was why Kennedy was doing this, not necessarily to get them to embrace the culture, but because he did not believe he could become president if he didn't pinch incense to Caesar on this. So he wanted the favor of heretics, and that's why he did it. Let's continue. In the address, Archbishop Chaput drew attention to Kennedy's surprising claim that would his political duties, quote, ever require me to violate my conscience or violate the national interest, I would resign the office. Kennedy also promised not to, quote, disavow my views or my church in order to win this contest. But as the Archbishop countered, Kennedy's Houston speech did just that. What modern trends in public Catholicism then did JFK set into motion? There seems to be at least three. Archbishop Chaput was careful to note in his speech that Christianity is not primarily about politics, nor do theories of political justice and policy play a prominent role in the spiritual life of Christians. By identifying the visible church primarily as a political phenomenon, Kennedy and his successors refer to a facet of Catholicism that isn't one. In this vein, Catholic public figures have at times made the reception of communion a highly political and sometimes defiant act. See the lady I call Lady Moloch on this, despite its wholly apolitical theological meaning to Catholics. A second trend is an ideological pragmatism that takes over the conscience. It's fine, politicians tell us, to employ religious reasons on matters of universal agreement, such as the need to say end homelessness or something. But there remains a set of issues off limits to Catholic conscience. As Kennedy put it, whatever issue may come before me as president on artificial barriers to not being fruitful and multiplying, or divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other such subject, I will make my decision in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be the national interest, without regard to outside religious pressure or dictates. Do you see how this works? Whatever the public generally is going to be okay with, then all of a sudden you see you see the Catholicism brought out, my religion tells me this, right? Which is interesting because we see that now with Dear Leader trying to use it on issues that the public doesn't support. And it's getting him a lot of pushback too. We've seen that with what's going down in Texas, for instance. We've seen him try that game, and it hasn't worked. Anyway, the only way this article says to interpret this claim honestly, it seems, is to conclude that we ought to form both a Catholic conscience and a secular one for each set of issues. This is a bifurcation, a separation of your conscience into your private realm and your public realm. On that distinction, Kennedy cleverly equivocates. Using this strategy, Catholic politicians have retained the allegiance of Catholic voters while all but adopting atheistic consciences in the public square. End quote. Kennedy was the first to do this. And, historically, there's a famous Jesuit priest named Father John Courtney Murray who was blamed for this happening. The public record gives him credit, if you want to call it that, for this happening. It's what the actual record shows was that he didn't actually approve it. They just said he did. But he's one who was given credit for this. There was a group of Jesuits in the 60s who worked with that family, the Kennedy family, to create this personal conscience, private conscience sort of bifurcation, this idea that you can keep your faith private except for when it's useful and otherwise not use it in the public realm. They did that to end this primacy of conscience argument. They did that back in those days specifically to make it so Catholics could get that office, because there was no chance before that. And now that they've gotten it, look what we've reaped with it. So we're talking here, dear leaders, proclamation on Sunday, casting Easter just to the side. They're going to do, they did an Easter observation yesterday, and dear leader hosted one. And what he ended up doing was banning religious symbols on Easter eggs, because of course, that's what they do. And so, it's not surprising that you're getting these kind of things. So if LifeSite reports that, quote, Cardinal Mueller joins calls for U.S. bishops to excommunicate dear leader. Cardinal Mueller condemned the widespread use of the Moloch ritual and likened it to bad stuff from his country's history, stressing how previous popes and bishops had no fear to excommunicate for grave offenses. And you would think this is you're starting to see more and more of this, right? I'll be putting together an article about Cardinal Mueller. He's been very, very, very active on this lately. I'm putting an article together for that for Catholic Family News for their May issue, so check that out when it comes. But he actually said that that dear leader should be excommunicated because of the Moloch issue explicitly. He says the actual word that I won't use on this platform because our hosts come down like you on the wrath of God for it. He says that word, though, is too much of a soft word. He just bluntly describes what it is. And because of what it is, dear leader is rejecting the faith. It's essentially a form of apostasy, what he's doing. It's using the faith as a sort of just a banner, as an object for personal gain. It's really quite remarkable. What is going on in the chat? There's some interesting things going on in the chat again, but breakthrough made in the USA says, did anybody see Megyn Kelly's interview with Bishop Barron? I did not watch that. I'm not a fan of either, really, so I haven't seen it. Gregory McKinley says, a Catholic conscience needs to be developed, not something that just zaps you from above at baptism. This is exactly correct. You need, for your Catholic conscience to be the thing that you're using, it needs to be formed as a well-formed Catholic conscience, which will adhere to what the church teaches, because the church is the guarantor of truth. The church teaches the truth in the name of our blessed Lord. Your primacy of conscience allows you to invoke your conscience when, let's say a bishop or even a pope decides they're going to teach things that aren't Catholic, to say, no, that's not what we're doing here. We're going to just keep the faith. Damien Keller says a well-formed Catholic conscience is the conduit God uses to speak to the heart. That's absolutely correct. Artsy Gamer says also, dear leader called them oyster eggs. Well, yeah, but so you get Cardinal Mueller calling for his excommunication, and there was even, I think this might be it. Yeah, this is Archbishop Viganò talking about this. He's I'm not going to read his whole thing here. We try to keep it quiet. Try to keep these short here, but so you get this. It says basically um, outrage at dear leader at Easter. And Viganò declares that he hates Lucifer and says that the excommunication of dear leader is automatic. So again, we have an automatic self-imposed excommunication for this denial of the objective reality God has crafted the world in. Actually, the statement is short. We could probably read the whole thing, as we will dance around the issue, of course. He says, in the Greek language, apocalypse means unveiling, revelation. This revelation in Holy Scripture refers above all to the objective reality of good and evil, that is, to the collective awareness of the ongoing war between God and Satan, between the children of light and the children of darkness. The unprecedented and scandalous proclamation of March 31st, as redacted by the person who calls himself the head of state of my country, dear leader who dares to declare himself Catholic, constitutes a very serious offense against God and against millions of Catholics and Christians in America and around the world, to which it is impossible not to react with due firmness. I urge American citizens and their representatives in the institutions to recognize the total unworthiness of dear leader to play an institutional role for which, and then he says things I absolutely cannot say on this platform. He invokes what happened last time, right? With that, this contest we're heading towards in November. He invoked what happened last time. He says, I ask my brothers in the episcopate and priests to recognize that the dear leader has incurred late sententia excommunication, and as such must be expelled from the churches and must not be admitted to communion. I invite Catholics and all Christians to pray so that on this solemn day of Easter, the risen Lord may have mercy on the United States of America and put an end to the attack of the infernal forces unleashed today more than ever. All of humanity is waking up from a sleep that has lasted too long, but it is now evident that the lives of the most vulnerable are at risk by the Moloch ritual and other sorts of things, and that the solution to the 2020 problem, that the total moral corruptions of heads of civil authority has led to subordination to wicked groups in an ever-growing plan to subvert everything. The increasingly arrogant display of the followers of Satan by the media in the world of culture and entertainment shows us a world immersed in atrocious diabolical evils that cry out to heaven for justice. The crazy provocation of a possible, they're trying to push us towards a fulfillment of prophecy, we'll say. They really, really want a conflict, a major, apocalyptic event. So what they do look like they're heading towards, and they're doing it built on the back of all sorts of other grave evils in the culture. Is what he's getting at here. Says Lucifer's hatred towards God and towards our Lord Jesus Christ can no longer be hidden or denied. This is the revelation that is unveiled before us, which the servants of darkness provocatively mock by celebrating evils and vices precisely on the most holy day in which we honor the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. Christians are progressively excluded from civil society and considered a threat to the evil project of the Novus Ordo Seclorum, while a minority of vicious and twisted people seek to establish their own deviations as a universal norm. This is dear leader's visibility and his evil ideology of the flesh, celebrating a macabre mad dance into the abyss. Rise up, children of light, stand up and raise your voice, because in the face of these evils, silence becomes complicit. Arise, Christians, arise to prevent the scourges that hang over the nations because of a usurped and twisted power. God calls you to be his witnesses, to fight for good, and to denounce the plan of an authority openly subordinate to Satan. The risen Christ, triumphant over death and sin, inflames you with faith, charity, and holy courage in this crucial phase of the history of humanity. Sed exit Dominus Vede, Alleluia, Alleluia. He said, gave Carlo Maria Viganò, March 31st, Easter Sunday. And then some stuff there from Marco Tosati, who published that. And I'll put this on my show notes at returntotradition.org here in a few minutes. But you're getting a lot of these kind of calls coming. Viganò is not surprising. Mueller is a little surprising because he is kind of a moderate who's using increasingly more strident language lately. But you're getting more and more of these calls for the bishops to excommunicate him. In fact, there's a lot of lay voices doing it, and not just the typical people. You would expect LifeSite to say for call for his excommunication, but you're seeing this more and more, and that's why I led with Cardinal Gregory calling him publicly a cafeteria Catholic, using his faith as a pawn. Who expected to see that? Now, do you really think Cardinal Gregory is going to ever back that up with action? Of course not. All right, folks, we are going to wrap this up. I'm actually sick still, so yeah. But what are you going off about in the chat there, Pierre? Are you okay? You're saying some really strange things in my live chat. But we're yes. So if there's any final thoughts in the chat, please put them in the chat now, and we will try to answer them, or then we'll wrap this up. So yeah, we have that story and the story of a Catholic priest who got in trouble with the secular authorities for teaching the truth right out of the catechism in a video. So you're going to want to see that. That's on live shortly. All right, folks. But what do you think? Were you surprised that Cardinal Gregory called him out? It was like the weakest calling out you could imagine, but he called him out publicly. Dear leader, he called him out. I'm surprised. So, Corey Trevor, well, at least Cardinal Gregory prays on his knees. Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time sometimes criticizing Francis for not getting on his knees and things, but then again, John Paul II in what looks externally like the worst condition was able to do, and Francis can't. But will anything happen? Matthew Blackledge says probably not. Probably not. It's mostly talk. Thank you for becoming a member of the channel, Lynn. That is greatly appreciated. Make channel members out there, remember, you get a free super chat. I think it's once a month, and it just highlights it the way like Lynn's messages here is. It makes it easier for me to see, so I can pop it up. It's a perk you get, like a free monthly one, in addition to the things I give to people. And that reminds me, yesterday there was a talk in the a listener decided to after what I talked about at the beginning of yesterday's live stream and on Sunday's live stream, that he said he took his own volition to launch a Give Send Go campaign for because we have a new child coming, and so and it's a wonderful thing, but as anybody who's had kids knows, it's caused you some major curveballs, and so he independently started to do a Give Send Go campaign, and I have been told many times that I need to stop when people offer to help me. I need to stop saying no. And some people yesterday reminded me that oftentimes when people offer charity and you reject it, it's actually a sin. So I'll put a link in the live chat there, and I'll probably put one in the comments here shortly after. But Gregory McElney says the Pope will have Gregory apologize publicly. Who knows? I mean, I'll put a link to what Cardinal Gregory said in my show notes too, so you can go watch that clip on Twitter. You'll see that it was he said in the kindest, like, grandfatherly way possible. That was struck me too, like, calling him a cafeteria Catholic but doing it with a smile on his face and the sort of grandfatherly demeanor. That was odd. But yeah. All right, folks. Can international subs offer? You mean like for the Give Send Go? I think so. I don't think that's limited to where you can do it at. But all right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. As always, pray for the church and for dear leader, especially. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.